Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Women Leaders, the podcast that explains global events through discussions with women experts. And welcome to ELN, the European Leadership Network, the home of this podcast. I'm Ilana Beit-El. I'm a Senior Associate Fellow at ELN, and I'm your host for this conversation with women who are leading and shaping the world in many ways and fields. And today, we are welcome back Tinatin Japaridze, who is definitely leading and shaping the world in many ways and fields. And currently, she is Director of Geopolitics at Anadyr Horizon. Welcome back, Tinatin.
Thank you so much, Ilana. It's great to be back.
So first of all, what is Anadyr Horizon?
Anadyr Horizon is actually a predictive intelligence company. So it's not consulting. Oftentimes people ask me, do you work for a consulting firm? It's actually a tech company. It's a tech firm that helps organizations and governments understand not just what's happening in the world today, but also how decisions are likely to cascade into tomorrow's crises. So instead of responding to a media headline, we are essentially in the business of anticipating the next headline before it actually hits the headlines everywhere.
And how do you do that? Forgive my asking.
Well, that's a great question and a very valid one as well. So we use AI-powered strategic simulations to help governments, investors, enterprises to stress test assumptions and to navigate uncertainty before the events actually unfold. And essentially what we do is we simulate decisions, not events.
It's an absolutely fascinating way to go because decision-making, to the best of my knowledge, for at least 2 decades, if not for a lot longer, has been a massive area of research. So you're suggesting that basically decision-making as a psychological field, as it very much was for many years, has now been put together with high-tech, AI. What's it been put together with?
So every crisis, Ilana, ultimately is a product of decisions that are
Absolutely.
interacting under uncertainty, right? And obviously, we all know this. We all operate on that assumption. And the world does not move in straight lines. It actually moves in cascades. So, for example, a sanction does not just affect one country. A military conflict does not just stay local, and a policy change does not stay isolated. So everything ultimately triggers second and third order effects. And our simulation are essentially designed to identify those cascades before they become visible. So we're not using AI to, for example, replace analysts. We're using AI and specifically our agentic systems intelligence, which is our proprietary system, our own engine that is meant to simulate complex systems at a scale that humans cannot achieve alone. So it's really meant to supercharge analysts. So I myself, as you well know, Ilana, and I've spoken to you in my previous capacity, at Eurasia Group as a desk analyst, I understood sort of the limitations and the limits and the restrictions of not having technology. Now, we can over-rely on technology, which is a problem. But if we ignore technology and stick our heads in the sand and pretend that AI will go away, that technology is not here to stay and to start dominating our lives, then we're at risk of essentially being controlled by AI and tech more broadly.
Fascinating. Explain how.
Well, the problem is that if we don't embrace the world that we live in with all of its faults and all of its challenges and try to a degree, if not control, at least try to live with and navigate tech, then it is before long going to essentially start dominating us and our thinking and our doing. So there's a fine line between pretending that it's not there and actually putting everything into an LLM, into ChatGPT, Gemini, whatever your choice of an LLM is this week, and relying on it to tell us what it is. So LLM, ChatGPT, is essentially an LLM.
What is it? What does it stand for?
So LLMs essentially are these large language systems, right?
That's just what I wanted to know.
They're a
Model.
large language model. They're the type of AI that is trained on massive amounts of data to understand and to summarize what we do, what we deal with, what we're thinking about, and to generate human-like text. So these large language models, they come in all shapes and sizes, ultimately. But at the end of the day, the issue that I have come across as an analyst was that as soon as you put a prompt together, you put it into ChatGPT, for example, and it spits out so much information. It looks good. It actually looks very, very sleek now. And it's very hard, unless you're an analyst who knows what it is that they're doing, it's very easy for you to buy into it and not start seeing all the different mistakes that it's making, whether it's detail that's off or the big picture is off. So without humans, we're not quite there yet to start relying on AI, to start relying on the large language models, and to start thinking that somehow we're going to be able to get away with either having one or the other. We need both. We need humans, but we need humans who are trained in what it is that they do and they know how to use technology. One without the other at the moment is just not an option.
I couldn't agree with you more. I understand a lot less than you do, which is one of the great reasons to have you on board. However, let me just push back and say, as a logical thing,
Mm-hmm.
we're currently in this intermediate place, as you put it.
Yes.
What happens if you raise more and more humans that are relying on ChatGPT? You'll end up in a place in which who can oversee the ChatGPT or the LLMs and say, that's wrong, that's right.
Exactly. Ultimately, Ilana, our output is only as good as the data that we are feeding the machine. If the data is already poisoned, the output will be poisoned. It's inevitable. It's similar to what we put in our bodies every day. There's a reason why, when we're little, we're being told not to overdose on potato chips. Because at some point, our body is not going to be able to digest it. And at some point, it becomes toxic. And then the output is toxic. I might have pimples all over my face at some point, maybe not the same day. And that is the same problem that I am seeing with technology, with AI, with different sorts of systems and engines and models, whatever we want to call them this week. Ultimately, it is about the health and the quality of the information and the data that we are putting into the machine, because we cannot keep putting the same, for lack of a better term, forgive me, crap into the engine and expect a different result. It will probably be poisoned. So that becomes a real issue where we're dealing with so much mis and disinformation in the world. And if the machine is scraping data all over the internet, the chances are it doesn't know the difference between the good, bad, and the neutral. So that's when the agentic systems, such as the one that our company Anadyr Horizon has built, to me, that actually is very, very important, because we are able to control the data. We are able to control the information that we are putting in. But then there's also a fine line, because if we're so biased, as is the case with analysts, that we have our own belief systems, we have our own ideologies, beliefs, whatever we want to call them, that is going to color the analysis as well. So there's a fine line between one and the other, and there has to be something in the middle, and that's something that I wrestle with every single day, trying to find that happy medium. There's something somewhere, that gold standard in the middle, and that is what I aspire to. We may not always get it right, but that is really the goal.
Before we get to what it is exactly you do, I think for a lot of people,
Yes.
your title is obvious, but actually they don't know what it means. What is geopolitical risk?
That is a fantastic question, because oftentimes I talk to people who allegedly and reportedly do geopolitical risk. And I ask them, well, what is geopolitical risk? And I get so many different answers. And I think some are more sort of accurate than others. But ultimately, the big thing that I want to sort of start with before we even talk about what geopolitical risk is that it is no longer a niche. It used to be a niche concern for diplomats and governments mostly, but it's become such a massive boardroom issue. It's an investor issue. It's a tech issue. And increasingly, it's becoming a personal one. And we think about geopolitics every single day. We may not call it that, but in our lives, and unfortunately the world that we live in today, we cannot escape from geopolitical risk. We are living it and breathing it every single minute of the day. It is, in a nutshell, risk that political decisions, strategic competition, conflicts, shifts in global power disrupt the way economies, societies, and tech and markets function. So a lot of people will tell you that they're really concerned about geopolitical risk, when in actuality, they are referring to something that is more specific, like export controls or supply chain disruptions, energy security, political instability. Yes, geopolitics is often the framework, But understanding the specific drivers underneath it is, I think, where very meaningful analysis begins.
Oh, as somebody who's made her living out of it for many years, I couldn't agree with you more. But it's always a problem, and I like your definition to try and explain to people what geopolitical risk is and why it ultimately, if you ask me, overrides all other
Mhm,
risks.
mhm.
Especially in a world in which orders are collapsing,
Sure.
because a collapsing order is by definition a geopolitical risk.
Absolutely.
um, but why does the world collapse? Or why does a world order collapse? Why is another trying to emerge? Why this? Why that?
Mhm, mhm.
Is what most people, to my mind, don't pay attention to. They
Yes.
think it's just a given. So I'm assuming that you're sitting in that niche and that is where you bring to bear. But how do you do that with your new company?
Mhm. I think before we even get into that, it may be worth thinking for a moment about how one of the biggest mistakes that I see, not just in geopolitical risk, but broadly in the way that we think about the world, the way the media talks about the world, is that we tend to focus exclusively on a single headline or a single conflict.
Absolutely.
And, I think the better question becomes, what does this event, whatever the event may be, no matter how big, medium size, or large it may be, what does it set in motion elsewhere? And I don't think that any geopolitical event exists in isolation. The world is increasingly interconnected, which is why we're seeing that the world order is shifting. But then when we look at the granular, we see that there's a lot of other things that are happening for that big puzzle to come together, because all the little pieces start crumbling or they come together depending on the era that we live in. Sadly, we are now living in a world where everything seems to be collapsing before it starts to rebuild again. And really what we try to look at Anadyr is, how are these cascading events manifesting themselves in the real world, and whether we are looking at it through the prism of a government client, a financial client, a hedge fund, investment bank, whatever it may be. Ultimately, most geopolitical analysis is meant to explain events. So we simulate trajectories. So we don't think about geopolitics as isolated events. We think of them as a network of cascading decisions. Every single crisis is ultimately the product of decisions interacting under uncertainty. And the world is moving in cascades. And that's why I think it's really important for us to look at the big picture before we zoom in. But then we also have to zoom in and not forget that the world is comprised of different countries, different political figures, non-political figures that are making decisions that make the world tick the way it does, for better or worse.
So let's be facetious here. Are you suggesting that if the Defense Department,
Mhm.
or whatever it calls itself now,
Yes.
the War Department or something, and the White House and the State Department had all consulted Anadyr before they decided to launch strikes on Iran, then you could have told them that Iran would respond by closing the Strait of Hormuz?
Yes. Yes. And our engine actually did predict that. And I think what's important, it's not so much that we are which is why we're not a consulting company. We are not telling someone to do something a certain way. What we're giving them is a bit of a crystal ball, if you like. We're telling them, if you do this, that is the likeliest scenario, the likeliest trajectory. There's also a non-base case scenario that could unfold. There's a black swan, a gray swan, something that is sort of low probability but very high impact that could unfold. So we are giving them the different options depending on which route they take, so that they have a sense of, if this happens, then that's likely to happen. And then it's followed by X, Y, and Z. So these cascading decisions and events is what we are trying to predict, is what happens if this one actor does that? And how is the other actor likeliest to respond? And what is the lower probability one, but a really massive impact event that could unfold as a result? So it's more of a, let's just put a mirror to your face as a decision maker, just so that you know what sort of a result your decision could yield. And of course, not everybody listens, and we're not in the business of trying to get them to do certain things. We're not in policy. We don't actually give policy recommendations for a reason. But what we do is we tell them, here's a menu of what could happen. with actual percentages of probabilities and likelihood attached to them.
Let's take a step back now.
Mhm.
Let's take a very big step back and ask ourselves, because I've been waiting for you to come on so that you and I could have this conversation for a long time about, I don't know if we can call it why did everything go wrong so much as why is so much happening at the same time?
Yes.
For a lot of people, I think, this combination of wars, we have two wars going on in parallel in Ukraine and Iran, except they're not just in Ukraine and they're not just in Iran. They've spread physically, first of all, throughout the Middle East and potentially to the Baltic states and the border with they've been disrupting events at a tremendously high rate for some time. Trump is elected a second time. Governments are weak in Europe, unable to make decisions, it appears. Putin is cut off from the world. Why is it all happening at once?
That's a great question, isn't it? It's $1 million question. I think that the one thing we can say with quite a lot of certainty is that it's all happening for a reason, the way it's happening for a reason at the same time. Ultimately, the wars, political conflict, economic uncertainty, all of the above, and then some, it is all happening at the same time because the world is ripe for something like that. I think the world order changing, and it's very sort of cliche to say that it's time for certain things to change. There's a cycle for a reason. I think the world order that was created after the end of the Second World War, there was a reason why it lasted and why it worked the way it did for a bit until it didn't. And we're still trying to cling on to what we think because that's our comfort zone. It's something that's familiar. We want that to stay static, but the world is not. Just like the seasons are constantly changing, the earth is turning for a reason. So it's just, there is an absolute reason for why things do change. And having a unipolar, bipolar, multipolar world order, it comes and goes in phases depending on what the bigger picture is. Positive trends become much harder to notice. History contains a lot of periods that have felt even more catastrophic, one could argue. But the world, maybe it's not literally collapsing, but many of us do perceive it that way because real problems are starting to occur during a period of rapid change. There's modern information systems, there's technology. We're exposed to those problems constantly. We are constantly over-informed. We have no shortage of information. We have no shortage of data points. But we are living in this world that is dominated by noise. There's so much noise, it's deafening. And we cannot hear signals anymore. We cannot see signals anymore. So perhaps we've been here before more times than we would like to think in recent years, but we are just so much more aware. We're so much more hyper aware. We're so much more sensitive to everything now. So it's all sort of starting to crumble because we are so much more aware about what's happening over there, the other side of the world. Whereas before, we knew what was happening locally, but little did we know until we got the reports that were secondhand, thirdhand sometimes, of something that had occurred 3-4 weeks ago or even months ago. And we were not aware of the fact that it was already happening. Now we are living through this. And we're many, many, many cogs in these multiple machines that are sometimes in sync, other times not, but they're all operating at different speeds. And there isn't a single actor that is calling the shots anymore. The US may want to have America come first. Somebody else may want to have something else come first. But ultimately, we are all operating at different speeds, but at the same time.
I think that's the beginning of a very good answer. And the reason I'm saying it's the beginning of the good answer, because I think you've mentioned two things. Let me push back, first of all, on the one word, change.
Yes.
I think that we lived through a period in which we didn't want change and we thought we could stop change. We went to models. I mean,
Yes.
what's the point of a model is that it's a model.
Sure.
And it's, sort of, you compare everything to the model, not to
Sure.
reality. And you lose the sense of change happening outside your window.
Hmm.
because the model says that we are Western countries. The model says
Right.
I'm a poor country. The model says banks are on top. The model says, and the model is based on science or whatever it is based on.
Sure.
And so actually, the concept of change became relatively limited to my mind.
Yes.
We talked about change, but
Yes.
not really. We only talked about good change.
Right.
It's a bit like luck. People don't understand, to my mind, that if you believe in good luck, then there
That's
has to
right.
be bad luck out there. There's two sides to it. So
Exactly.
if you want good change, there has to be bad change too somewhere. It's not an absolute that you can only have change in one way. But that was somehow masked, I
Hmm.
think, for a very, very long time. And people have lived in different periods of change. Go back to the Industrial Revolution. Both the rich and the poor living through the Industrial Revolution felt it every day. I mean, if you were working in a factory, you had no option but to feel it every day. And if you were getting richer and richer and suddenly moving out of a small house into a big house, same thing. So I think that change, we've sort of rejected the idea that there's bad change.
Right.
Change is only good change.
Right. Absolutely. And there's change and there's shifts as well. And I think perhaps now that you're pushing back, I do appreciate it because it sort of makes me wonder, is the world changing or is it shifting? Our belief systems are shifting, values are shifting. Doesn't mean that the pendulum is not going to swing in the other direction very soon. The thing is that we're going from one extreme to another constantly. There's nothing. I tend to be a bit, without getting too much into sort of my own political and ideological beliefs. I'm a bit more of a kind of moderate centrist. A little to the left sometimes on certain issues, maybe a little more centrist on other issues. But ultimately, I think for me, happiness is somewhere in the middle. And when we go from one radical extreme to the other,
Absolutely.
that's when the equilibrium and everything else in it starts to get really disturbed. So we're living through this turbulent time because of all these shifts that are not, a little to the left, a little to the right. They're really drastic and really radical, actually. So that becomes a problem because I do think that change generally is good. We shed our skin for a reason from season to season because otherwise we are accumulating all the dirt. And if we don't shed it every now and then, that's not good either. Some of us, I think, are more predisposed to being able to deal with those changes. And for us, it becomes more of a shift, more of a pivot. And for others, their entire world starts to crumble.
I've never thought of the world as an exfoliator, but that's a good one to go to.
If somebody's listening from one of the companies, they should probably
Exactly.
find it.
Sort of, I think you've invented a new concept, life is the exfoliator.
That's it. Career change on the horizon.
But I do think that it's a very important point to make, which is good change is not possible unless there's also bad change, because change is a holistic thing, and we only tend to understand it in one way. I think the other thing I wanted to pick up on what you were saying, which was really, really very, very good, is the way in which we sort of have to look ahead
Hmm.
and see where it takes us, because we have to understand that sort of we've always been through these processes, because there's nothing particularly new about it. It's not something that oh, just now we have found out that you can sort of, I think it's perennial to the human condition. It's just that because of, and this would be my probably final comment on what you said, it is to do with the cyber world.
Mm.
And whilst I agree with you that the cyber world gives us a hell of a lot more information,
Hmm.
it also controls us all the
It does.
time. I mean, the amount of people who only get their news from an algorithm about
Absolutely.
them is frightening. And just because you use the Apple algorithm as opposed to Meta doesn't make it better. It's still somebody's algorithm. And, I've always liked the old joke about, why is there no customer service in Google? Because you're the product, you're not the customer.
That's crazy. Absolutely. We are. We really, really are.
But why are people so worried about AI when we're already being controlled by a small number of companies that not only have all the data about us, but are also telling us what to read, think, see, understand?
That's right. They're telling us what we want when we don't even know what we want. And they're telling us what we want. They're feeding us what we want. Going back to the analogy from earlier, whatever you put in your body's going to respond to it. Well, we're not making the choices of what it is that we're going to eat literally and figuratively anymore. We're just being fed anything and everything, and we're taking it. And we are such willing, not just, as you were saying, customers and clients, but actually we are the product, that we are very willingly participating in this game and we're paying for it.
Yes, that's the
Upgrading from one phone to another because we want the fanciest, flashiest, the one with all the bells and whistles, and we will pay a little extra for the extra bells and whistles that will then control us even more. It's a problem, but I'm afraid we are part of this, in a way, simulation. We are living in this simulation, and we're very willing actors. We somehow made a deal. We made this pact when we accepted that this is the world we're going to live in. We don't have many other options to go and live in a different world or live on a different planet yet. We're not there yet. So until that happens, when we are able to eject ourselves from the system that we're a part of, we have to adapt, and we're constantly adapting without going back too much to sort of shifting. I don't think that necessarily is a bad thing. It doesn't necessarily mean automatically falling apart. I think the systems that people built in the past, they're just adjusting to these new conditions. Some parts break, some evolve, new things replace them. There's fancier technology. I mean, I thought I had the fanciest phone when I had let's just use a name of a company, if you don't mind, Motorola phone, 20 years ago, I had a fancy. And then at some point I realized, my goodness, when I just look at those phones now, I think I was a cave person. I lived in a cave. And I thought I had the fanciest toy. And it actually turns out that 2 minutes later, something else came out that was so much fancier, made me feel completely out of date. So we are participating in this, and we are very, very willing participants. So we are feeding the machine, and then it feeds us. So in a way, we're sort of helping each other. So who is poisoning whom, I do not know, and who is using whom, I also do not know. We use the phone, but then the phone is using us. And it's this perennial sort of, we're going around in circles. Do I want to get off of this merry-go-round at some point? Probably. But I also want to know how far it can get me and how far it can go. And I think that's the question about sort of looking into the future. We can't help it. We've always wanted it. Some people use tarot cards. Now we're using simulations to look into the world to see what is out there.
That part, yes. But who's in charge now, really? Is it the big tech companies or governments?
Well, it really depends on who is controlling the tech companies. But then also, are the tech companies controlling the government? It's a chicken and an egg issue. I think it depends on the day of the week. It depends on the company. It depends on the government. But ultimately, they are controlling each other and enabling each other. And what ends up happening is you and I get stranded in the middle of this, and we sort of then become, and I hate this term, being a cog in a machine, but we are, because we have these two competing machines that sometimes enable each other, other times they compete with each other, but ultimately they are there to fuel one another. Governments and companies, not just tech companies, but really companies in general. And we're these sort of, we thought we were customers, but as you said, Ilana, we're not. We're the product, and we're a part of this. And there's no stopping this machine now. We're part of the system.
I think that's very, very fascinating and very important to raise these issues, because I really think that many people who are angry at governments nowadays in the West, let
Yes.
alone in non so-called democratic countries
Yes.
or developed countries, don't understand how limited the power of a government is in relation to especially the major cyber companies, but
Absolutely.
also the banks, and a number of other very big companies. But I think especially in relation to the cyber companies and the banks, those two are very, very big in controlling governments as much as governments are big in controlling them. And we're caught in the middle somehow.
Absolutely. And AI, at the end of the day, it's not just a single event, right? And it's not just a single tech. It's not a phone of a certain brand. It's a phase, really, a phase change in how information and workflow through society. And that's why I think it feels like the ground is moving. It actually is, but unevenly so. And at different speeds, depending on the industry and the country, which government, which week. And we are part of this. So we're also shifting. We're feeling these shifts because we are standing on that ground. It's very uneven. And I don't think that it'll become even anytime soon. And, our predecessors, my parents, my grandparents, they talk about, oh, but the world was so much more predictable before. Was it? Or was it because we just knew a lot less? And we were far less in tune with what it was that was happening around us. We were just much more concerned with our local issues, our own lives. And now we're so much more concerned with what's happening over there. We've forgotten about what it is that we're a part of. And what about us and our day? We're so concerned with their day that we've forgotten to live our own days on our own.
I think there's a huge amount in what you say, not least. There was a wonderful phrase coined by the historian James Joel about the First World War, which is unspoken assumptions.
Yes.
Because in many ways, the first big disaster was the First World War,
Yes.
which leads to so much else afterwards. But I've always thought that unspoken assumptions, and I think we were living in a world of unspoken assumptions
Yes.
up until 2008. And 2008, the financial crisis, there's those who say it's 9/11, and I'm not sure that is the case. I think it's 2008 that is much more destructive for the whole world. And all the unspoken assumptions come cascading down. And the fact that nobody has sat in jail or was found to blame for 2008, I think, has become one of the big sore points that allows populist politicians, without even mentioning 2008, most of them have no idea what happened then, to create this fervor, which is very much enabled by the cyber world, by all of this right now. That's my explanation of the last 20 years. What's yours?
So I think that explanation is actually a very interesting one because when people ask me when did things start going wrong in Russia, I mean, things were always going wrong in some way. But let's look at the 90s in Russia. That's a different kind of
Absolutely.
2008, right? What we saw in Russia, what happened, the economic crisis and the oligarchs taking over, and that entire system that collapsed with the end of the Soviet Empire and the country that was built on its ashes, and how essentially the 90s is still what Russia is wrestling with every single day. And Putin is a byproduct of that. A lot of people that I talk to are a byproduct of that. In some ways, because I lived in Russia in the 90s as well, I'm a byproduct of that. Those certain things that don't just go away. It doesn't go away. It stays in your DNA. And the world changes, the country changes, and you don't notice that when you're in it, in that moment. But actually, it takes years and years and sometimes decades to realize that's when yet another tectonic change happened. That shift happened, and it's never been the same since then. And I think we will be going back to 2008. We will be going back to the 90s in Russia. We'll be going back in history. That's why I think when students ask me, what should I take as a course to become an analyst, and they think I will tell them about the latest statistics course or something on AI or computer science, and I say history. Know your history. It's so important because the lessons are there. The problem is we as humans don't often learn the lessons that we're taught. We forget to learn those lessons, and then we make the same mistake over and over again, and we go into the same river multiple times. But it's all there. Many of the answers are there. They may look different. The tech was different. The screens were different, less pixels on them, but we've been there so many times before.
We've been there so many times before, and we tend to forget that at least until AI produces so many robots that will be irrelevant,
Right.
we're still motivated by human emotions.
We are.
And, if I ever had to explain, I think I once wrote this in somewhere, the difference between the 30s in Germany and the lead up to our current era is in the 30s, you needed to have a Goebbels. You needed to mount huge parades with
Yes.
flags,
Yes.
and you had to physically get people in.
Absolutely.
Though the cyber geeks would hate this, and the big IT companies would hate it. They've enabled the new parades. You don't even need to
Right?
go out.
No.
The cyber world is the parade ground with the flags, with the salutes, with the swastikas, you name it, it's there. It's there and it's delivered every day to your inbox. You
That's
don't
right.
even need to do anything about it. And we're not understanding that that's what we're living through in
No.
very many ways, but it's about humans. It's about human emotions. And are we happy? Are we sad?
Hmm.
Do we agree or disagree? Well, it very much depends on whether we're happy or sad or hungry or, sated or whatever. We're going philosophical. We're going very
We
philosophical
are.
here.
We are. But that's great. It's 8:45 in the morning my time. And that's the best way for me to start my day. But I think, Ilana, in all seriousness, it is something we need to think about because AI, no matter how fancy it may be, and there are multiple bells and whistles that are being added to it every single day. It looks more impressive. The writing becomes a bit better. It's a lot sort of sleeker and flashier. But ultimately, we cannot forget that for the foreseeable future, maybe, while you and I are still here, perhaps who knows, the next 3 generations may see a different world. But for the time being, AI does not understand in a human sense of the word. It can, simulate reasoning, but it doesn't have consciousness, personal experience, genuine understanding of meaning and consequences, judgment, intuition, feelings. Yes, over time, they who are behind the machine may be able to develop one or the other, but we've been here a lot longer than technology will be here, even for the next few centuries. So we've been refining our machinery for a very long time. It's not perfect. It's very oftentimes broken. It doesn't work oftentimes, but we've had a lot more time to tinker with our own machine. And I think that fear of, oh, AI is going to replace us, it's only going to replace us if we let it. And depending on what sort of world we want to live in, do we want to live in a world that is going to be governed by robots that have no feelings, no consciousness, no intuition, no judgment? And yes, probably a computer game will be able to replace, a fancier computer game will be able to replace another one from the time before. But the fear of we are all going to become robots, somehow, maybe because I swim in this river now, the more I play with the systems, and I'm so impressed by it, and it's fantastic, but the more insight I get into how the machine is made and what actually happens in the kitchen, I realize that we are really nowhere near that moment.
That's actually very comforting to hear
I don't know, I could be
because
wrong, but
you could be wrong. But even if you are wrong, the very fact that, as you say, you're swimming in those
Mhm.
waters and you have that sense, I think that what we're not going down, if we are going to be philosophical, is the difference also between ethical decisions and moral
Yes,
decisions
yes,
and everyday, should I have a cup of coffee or
absolutely.
not? Or am I going to be fat by eating this or not? Should I switch this machine off? Oh, it's a heart and lung machine. Or should I launch this drone that's not going to be guided by anything but a computer? Those are
Exactly.
ethical, those are moral decisions. I mean, I have genuinely zero problem with a machine telling somebody if they should eat that or not eat that,
Absolutely.
as long as it's on them, kind of thing. I
Right.
do have an issue with, sort of issues that are related to our very being,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to our life and death, to our
Yes.
nature around us being decided by machines.
Yes.
And that, I think, is not only immoral and problematic, but it may not be efficient at the end of the day. Who's to say it
Absolutely.
won't, it won't blow us all up more than we're being blown up? You know,
Exactly.
that I think is often misunderstood and often not looked at enough. Let's look at just one last thing because we are coming towards the end of our conversation, which I feel as though we've just got started. But hey ho, keeping in mind everything that we've talked about, where are we now in terms of not so much AI or we're in the middle, let's go back to the beginning. We're in the middle of two major wars involving the West. We're involved in climate change, world orders collapsing. What's happening?
We will find out when this phase has ended, I think, because we are still in it. We are very much in it. And the one thing that we can say with absolute certainty is that no matter how hard we try and no matter how nostalgic we get, we are not going back to the way things were. We're just not. And that's normal, actually, because no matter how nostalgic you and I may feel about our wonderful childhoods, we can't go back.
No.
And the world that we lived in, even 5 years ago, I'm not even talking about 20 years ago, that world is gone. That entire ecosystem is gone. It's not coming back. And if we keep fighting the system to try to go back to the way things were because that somehow felt better, well, nostalgia is exactly that. We're nostalgic for something that never was. So was the world really that much better, or was the world just very different? But it will be different again, and it'll be different 5 years from now and 5 minutes from now even. The speed at which the world is changing, I think that is the part that may be the most unsettling for us, because it's happening very fast, it's evolving extremely quickly, and we are sometimes unable to keep up with it, which is why we keep turning to these machines to help us make sense of what in the world is happening. Where are we and where are we going? We're on this train. We can't quite get off of it. We're on it. And we cannot control the speed. And we cannot even control the trajectory. Nobody knows what the destination is. So we are somewhere between then, now, and that other thing that we don't quite know what it is. We don't know what the destination is, but it's somewhere out there and we are going there. But we're also going nowhere fast. We're going somewhere. But it will take us a minute to realize, probably at that point when we get off the train at that station, the next one for a hot second, that, oh, that's where we were going, apparently. But nobody really knows. We're hearing all these different explanations of how the world is changing and why the world order is changing. But nobody actually knows what it is that is happening. And we can simulate all the decisions we want. And I absolutely love and am fascinated by the work that I'm fortunate to be doing. But in the end, no one knows. We may know the probability of X happening and Y intervening. But where are we headed? Maybe that's part of life. I know we're ending it on a very philosophical note, but maybe that's the beauty of it. The not knowing. We want to know certain things because companies need to trade and governments need to make policy decisions. But we as humans, do we really want to know? Ilana, do you really want to put it into an LLM now that we've established what an LLM is? The next prompt about what it is that's going to happen in your life 5 years from now. Do we really want to know? Or is there beauty in not knowing, as long as we still maintain some sort of, not control maybe, but autonomy over our own lives? I think that's the part that scares me with technology, is when are we giving up absolute control and when is the machine running us and what we're thinking and what we're feeling? That is my fear, not so much that technology is so fantastic and that it's evolving so fast.
Wow. I couldn't agree with you more. Really. I mean, what a wonderful place to end this fascinating conversation, which brings to mind the one line which I've always thought is the best guiding one in life, which is John Lennon's, which is, life is what happens to you whilst you're busy making other plans. And that is my answer to you as to, do I want to know what's going to happen in 5 years? Even if I did, whatever happens to me is
Absolutely.
life. Woo! Tinatin Japaridze, thank you so much for joining us again. That was a wonderful conversation. Keep listening to our conversations and support us with a subscription on our podcast platform. Leave us a 5-star on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And of course, add to the conversation with your comments. In addition, help support our podcast and spread the happy word of this episode to friends, colleagues, enemies, family, and anyone you think would like it. We're on all media, so reach out on Instagram as @women_leaders_podcast and on ELN, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. All information and links mentioned in the episode can be found in the notes. I'm Ilana Beitel, together with my friend and producer, Florence Ferrando, and we'll be back very soon with another great conversation.